Okay, so our group presentation is on transpersonal sexual experiences. And today I'm going to be going over the varieties of transpersonal sexual experiences, and then the history and cultural differences and similarities of transpersonal sexual experiences will also be discussed, in addition to Kundalini and how it pertains to transpersonal sexual experiences. So there are a few themes within these experiences. So they often they can happen to anyone, and they are spontaneous and unplanned. They provoke feelings of interconnectedness and revelation. There is a loss of time and space. They deepen connection to self, other, and spirit. And then they also promote embodiment, healing, sexual liberation, and self-empowerment. So there really is no one clear definition of transpersonal sexual experience. However, there are two common narratives or themes that are consistent in the discussion of these experiences. One of which is participation in an altered state of consciousness, and that cannot be based on the use of substances, plant medicine, or deliberate techniques such as BDSM. In these altered states of consciousness, there is a loss of time, space, and/or agency. The state includes an awareness of their partner, and it is rooted in the union of body, mind, and spirit during sex. And then also that these experiences include a felt experience of a cosmic force. So that is considered to be God, spirit, the divine, the void, so on, and while engaging with one or both partners in the context of their relationship. So the varieties of transpersonal sexual experiences are based on Stanislav Grof's model of transpersonal states. This is found through a study from the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology back in 2000. So let's see, there are experiences of dual unity, the melting of the boundaries of body and ego with a sense of merging with another person into a state of unity or oneness. This is the most common experience reported by people who were interviewed for this study. There was also experience of group identification and group consciousness. So expansion of consciousness to an awareness of an entire group of people by race, nationality, culture, profession, religion, ideology, or destiny. Many women within the study were found to identify with the experiences of all women, not just as an identity, but as a sense of unity of women throughout the lifespan. So this was also pretty interesting to find that there were experiences of identification with animals. So it was a rather realistic identification with members of various species. So it varies slightly from Grof's understanding of this, whereas people reported more feeling or embodied states versus intellectual knowledge. The people who have reported of this experience, they speak of metamorphosis into possession or being overtaken by this altered state of being and thinking like animals during sexual experiences. Oneness with life and all creation. Many people reported identifying with the entirety of life on Earth, including all beings, extending all the way to single-celled organisms and even viruses. Most people reported an experience of openness where they identify with all beings, seeing union and interconnectedness between. Experiences of the inanimate. So there were people that reported identification with macro and microscopic processes of inorganic nature. it was rare. However, when it was reported, they had stated that they witnessed and even become part of both energy and matter. Many women reported extraterrestrial experiences, particularly journeying through space, flying through the solar system, surrounded by stars and planets. So other people stated that they witnessed explosions, the development and death of stars, and identification with entities and events that existed in our galaxy. Other people, this was pretty commonly reported, was psychic phenomena involving transcendence of space. So this includes out-of-body experiences, clairvoyance, clairaudience, and telepathy. So out-of-body experiences were the most reported psychic phenomena as it pertains to transpersonal sexual experiences. And they usually involved being suspended above the physical experience, accompanied by feelings of curiosity, peace, etc. Women, interestingly, reported being moved to urban and coastal locations, many of them reporting that they were underwater or at sea. Some people reported cases of telepathy, sensing or reading the mind of other people who were uninvolved in the acts of sex between the partners in the moment. This I found particularly interesting to learn about this regression that people experienced. So the ancestral experiences, right? So people regressed through their own biological origins that preceded a person, that person's conception, and it included an identification with their own ancestors. So some people actually feel physically moved back in time into the bodies and personalities of their ancestors as well. And I found this example really interesting to see that there was a woman within this study who found herself as a Celtic priestess during the Roman conquest of Europe. And this is from her directly. I was there during the time when the Roman Empire was invading Gaul. I had this sense that I had died in a Roman prison. Some of the most excruciating pain I ever experienced was a vision that Jay had right after we'd made love, this feeling that they were burning my trees, burning my groves. And at the time of this experience, she had known nothing consciously about ancient Celtic culture, nor about her ancestry, but the identification with what she had experienced was so strong, she actually decided to check into her own ancestry. She didn't, and then this is another direct quote from her, stating that I didn't even know the names of my great-grandparents. I did the research later. I found out the groves were sacred in the Druid tradition. They actually worshipped in the groves of trees, and that's why I was so upset that my trees were burning. I've tried to verify some of the other stuff as actual historical occurrences. And of course, the Roman Empire eventually overtook Gaul up almost into Ireland. But when I get in that guise, I can speak Gaelic fairly well. And I don't even know Gaelic. It's the damnedest thing. My lover had written down some of the stuff I had said, and it's all old Gaelic. We've actually looked it up, and that's directly taken from the study conducted by Wade. People also have had experiences of like past lives or past incarnation, right? So there are episodes that occur at another time and place in history. People experience the self in another way at another place in time. And the only experiences involving past lives in some capacity have been able to place both partners into a shared altered state. So more psychic phenomena, the transcendent, but this was the transcendence of time, which includes precognition, clairaudience, clairvoyance, and obtaining information from touching an object, as well as time travel. And then physical introversion and narrowing of consciousness, so cellular consciousness. This was pretty interesting as well, to see that someone had an experience of being both completely and totally aware of every cell in their body, and that it was this feeling of every cell vibrating at the same frequency, and yet at the same time they weren't able to fully inhabit their body. Let's see. Other people have reported channeling experiences. So this is where their partner's gestures, voice, and so on are changed. People can perceive entities or energy forms, and also most commonly it was reported was shape-shifting. So it actually involves the rapid succession of a number of different faces superimposed on their partner. Let's see, energetic phenomena of the subtle body. So this was most commonly reported is the experience of various energy fields described in mystical traditions. The most common example of this is Kundalini. And then lastly, many people also reported encounters with spirit guides, interactions with guides, teachers, protectors, and beings of light. People report having visions of them or even feeling themselves or their partners manifesting these divine forms coming forward. Most commonly, there's a felt sense of a third divine entity that is co-created by the lovers. I really wanted to speak to the variety of these experiences because it goes to show that there really is no one single definition of a transpersonal sexual experience, and they really do vary from person to person, culture to culture. And I also found this research really interesting in that, it gave people a space to freely express what they have not even told their own partners. And again, as stated before, the more that the transpersonal experiences in the realm of like sexual experiences are discussed and spoken about, the more people can feel, let's say, less shame about these experiences occurring, and even potentially less fear, because of how spontaneous these experiences can be. And at the end, in the conclusion of the report, it really did speak to how people felt as if they were crazy or wouldn't be taken seriously when discussing these experiences. So I found it just really great to see that there's work being done out there regarding this, because it is more common than people would think.
And today I want to tell you guys a little bit about transpersonal sexual experiences in terms of culture. To follow up on what Camryn was saying, so there's a vast variety of transpersonal sexual experiences. They can come in many forms, but they don't have any specificity as far as your creed or your culture. Can happen to anyone. Doesn't have to do with whether you're by yourself during a masturbatory act or with a partner, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with whether that partner is someone you've been in a long relationship with. In fact, it can even happen without touching. But there are still some cultural aspects as far as how these experiences might be framed. But to start off, let's begin with a bit of a history of of transpersonal sexual experiences. So, sex and spirituality have been connected since ancient times. An early example is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was recorded 4,000 years ago, but it originates from oral tradition that started back in 2700 BCE. Essentially, the story goes there's a furry creature of some kind, and a goddess commands a priestess, who is a priestess of sacred sex, to make love to this furry creature. His name is Enkidu. And this sacred sex process is a week long. So after this week goes by, Enkidu is now standing upright. He's more intelligent, and he's in part now divine. In the ancient Near East, traditions of transpersonal sex were retained even with the rise of civilization and centralized religion, unlike many other cultures. So, priestesses engaged in ritual sex, enacting the holy union of god and goddess. Eros Gamos is what that was called, or what that is called. Sexual mystery schools and fertility cults in different cultures existed. Some of those are Isis, the cults and mystery schools of Isis, Pan, Ishtar, Sybil, and Dionysus. Some religions feature divine couples, such as in Hinduism. One aspect of the history is that most of this knowledge has been lost or muddled to history. So mystery school and fertility cult knowledge was obscure even for the time that they existed in, and since then has been lost. As far as indigenous peoples, we don't really know what their practices were in regard to sexual experiences and spirituality, due to colonialism and the loss of direct transmission of these knowledges and wisdoms. So, other than that, generally speaking, both Eastern and Western religions all retain significant sexual symbolism, but this does not include incarnate sexuality, like within the practice itself, especially in regard to women. So even traditions that ideologically held women in high esteem came to exclude women from full initiation and relegated them to as an instrumental role in the self-transformation of their male counterparts. So religious doctrines, after a certain time, began to have a focus on separating the sexual and the spiritual. There's like classic Buddhist texts like the Visuddhimagga, which speaks of foregoing one's attachment to sensual pleasure. Christianity, as most of us should know, has a reverence for celibacy and asceticism. So Gnostic and other Christian mystical traditions, which have always included sexual imagery as well as feminine aspects of God, such as Sophia, were largely persecuted out of existence. The sacred texts of such traditions were suppressed or denied canonical validity. Um, some of these texts are like include the Gnostic Gospels, Jewish Pseudepigrapha, Christian Apocrypha, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were actually discovered like pretty recently. Some of the, at least the Dead Sea Scrolls, in like the 1980s, I believe, 1970s. Now I wanted to talk about cultural frameworks in relation to transpersonal sexual experiences. So because transpersonal sexual experiences can occur without warning, they can be frightening and destabilizing. Some people can even experience things like spiritual emergencies. So especially when people have no awareness of their awareness of the existence of transpersonal sexual experiences. At the same time as this, unconditioned expectations can produce a much larger range of positive and transformative effects than those of deliberate practices. At the same time, the framing of such experiences through cultural knowledge in regard to a positive connection between spirituality and sex can help to guide a person, influencing the experience and potentially curbing any negative outcomes, or most or some, as one would presume. So some of these, to drop a few, include the Kundalini. So Kundalini, although Taylor will be getting into some more detail about that later, is included in practices like Kundalini yoga, Hindu and Buddhist forms of Tantra, and it describes the awakening of a psycho-spiritual energy that's located at the base of the spine. So in these traditions, sexual energy and spiritual force are one and the same. In Taoism, Taoism seeks to balance the two primary forces, yin and yang, femininity and masculinity being essential aspects of those. So a quote regarding Taoists of ancient China says, the Taoists of ancient China looked upon sex as a vehicle for enlightenment, providing that the sexual urge was properly harnessed. To them, sex and spirituality were interdependent. Next, we have Judaism. So in Judaism, there's a mystical tradition known as Kabbalah. In that tradition, there's something called the Tree of Life, which is a primary symbolic image in that practice. So it encompasses 10 spheres of energy where each represents an emanation of divinity and a state of consciousness. So it can basically be understood as a map of consciousness. So the Tree of Life can be used as a model of sexual and spiritual development similar to the one found in Kundalini Yoga. So the central pillar in this Tree of Life corresponds to the spine. Shekinah, the divine presence, rises along the planes of awareness, making a straight path to the crown in Kether. I presume that kind of translates to the crown chakra in other practices, such as Kundalini and other practices as well. Namida is written in the 13th century, says that through the act of intercourse, they become partners with God in the act of creation. This is the mystery of what the sages said. When a man unites with his wife in holiness, the Shekinah is between them in the mystery of man and woman. The breadth of this statement is sobering when you consider that this Shekinah glory is the same presence Moses experienced when God met with him face to face. Lastly, I want to go over shortly African traditional religion. So essentially, as a whole, sex is considered sacred and it has a religious flavor. So some of these aspects where sex is considered sacred is, we can say, it must be performed mainly by husband and wife. Hence, there's no room for premarital and extramarital sex. It must be performed at night and not in the afternoon, as prescribed in some religious taboos placed on sex. For example, the belief is that any couple that has sex in the afternoon will give birth to an albino child. Albinos are Eni Orisa, that is, those who belong to the divinities. Thus, they are not ordinary children. Unlike other normal children, they have to observe the do's and don'ts associated with belonging to Orisa. Yoruba people or traditional religionists dread offending the divinities. Other places where sex must not be performed include the farmland, so that the ancestors of the land would not be offended. It is no wonder that there are specific rituals that must also be performed whenever anybody broke any taboo in relation to sex. And sex is considered sacred in all its forms and interpretation. In fact, it is something that must not be talked about. So no wonder that activities often associated with sex, such as kissing and petting, are not so common in Africa, especially when done in and around public places. Anything that relates to romance and sex is to be done secretly. And yeah, I'll leave it up to Taylor to finish us up. Here are references.
Hi, everybody. My name is Taylor Allen. In my slide, I will be discussing transpersonal sexual / Kundalini experiences. So I wanted to first get into what is Kundalini energy. Kundalini energy is often described as a coiled snake at the base of the spine that the yogi must awaken. It is the divine feminine energy that is also known as the goddess energy, and sometimes as a serpent energy. In Hindu and yoga philosophy, it is the creative power and energy of the universe. In many yoga traditions, Kundalini energy is believed to lie dormant at the base of the spine, and one of the purposes of yoga practices is to awaken this energy. When our Kundalini energy spikes up through our spine, it is the most pure expression. We can experience extremely powerful surges at a kind of wave-like energy flow, rising up from the base of our spine, up into our heart space, into our head and beyond. This is when we make the experience of being a channel or vessel of this energy, which both pours into us from the core of the earth and from the higher realms. Kundalini type experiences are found in teachings of the Egyptians, Tibetans, Chinese, some Native Americans, and Africa. Kundalini energy is also believed to have benefits like helps to be present, clears and calms the mind, improves memory, relieves physical alignment such as stomach, liver, kidney, and throat. Next will be, how does Kundalini affect consciousness? It is not an energy apart from consciousness, but rather the energy that manifests within consciousness when it becomes free of thought. Practicing Kundalini is used as a tool to expand consciousness and read a state of lightness, joy, and boundless love as it pulls the energy that lies at the base of our spine up to the crown of our heads, creating an upward flow of energy and balancing our chakras and energetic bodies. When you're having a Kundalini awakening, your consciousness level heightens. This video is from Bor Kufayev, and he's going to speak about how it relates to sexual experiences.
Not every rising, not every awakened Kundalini leads to its goal as a given. This is another, if you will, part where a lot of New Age stuff, full of confusing informations that Kundalini is the intelligence itself, and as long as Kundalini is awakened, then it's guaranteed that it does what needs to be done, it knows what to do, and because it's the power of intelligence itself, and one will just need to, fasten the seatbelt until one arrives at the desired destination. The reason why not all risings lead to the same goal is simply because not all of them proceed equally through the same pathways of energy. And this particular discussion is not allow us to go into minute details of these processes, but suffice to say is that only ascent through Sushumna and through its principal paths that leads to the desired destination, union with the higher center in the Sahasrara, from where the different variations. Again, this is not part of our discussion today, but even within the Sushumna channel, I will single that one out. There is so-called Vajra Nadi, and the Vajra Nadi moves from the second chakra up to the plateau, but below the plateau, exemplified by the pineal gland, but it does not go beyond. It doesn't give access to the highest abode, and therefore it is agitated and moves only within these parameters. The Vajranadi is associated with the activity of sexual enjoyment and sexual pleasure, and it is always activated whenever we get aroused sexually. So in other words, Vajranadi is already active in, I would say, 99.9% of human beings. Vajranadi is active in most human beings who are sexually active. Therefore, there is nothing to be activated in that nadi. And yet, it's very often that Kundalini chooses that pathway from the place of the Svadhisthana, the chakra associated with the watery realm, and it goes all the way to the head, but not beyond the plateau. It meets the abstraction literally and impenetrable, because that nadi terminates there. That nadi does not have another pathway of energy. So therefore it's forced to go down, just as in every sexual act. But of course it gives all the paraphernalia of a true spiritual experience. And people who walk around considering themselves enlightened, just as sexual intercourse can give that flavor of bliss, beatitude, trepidation, ecstasy, everything. Orgasm itself can be very close in its display with spiritual ecstasy, because it's the same force, just played at the different poles of its extreme. And yet, that's not the path, even within the Sushumna, that leads to the union of opposites here. And I'm not even talking about the pathways that are peripheral to the Sushumna, this so-called completely undesirable ascents in either of the channels, in either of the Saraswati channel or the Lakshmi channel, let alone any of the channels associated with Ida or Pingala. So this is why not every rising leads to its goal, simply because Kundalini is not automatically rises in Sushumna. There are many cases today, especially among the folks who wake up out of the blue with no spiritual preparation, with no vehicle as the instrumentality of the human body being prepared in any way. And the likelihood of the nervous system and all the aforementioned pathways of energy are being clogged, waxed. At times we speak about it in terms of being waxed. So all this stuff needs to be molten out of the system, dissolved. And until that happens, it will keep doing this ascents in inappropriate manner. So therefore, Kundalini rising, it's a science, a profound science in its own way, in its own right. And we speak about it at this introductory level, we feel is fitting to mention, so that there are no assumptions made, and so that there is no also speculations in terms of the verticality of that process.
Okay. This will close my presentation, and thank you all for listening.